Hi, this is Donna. Welcome to DD Paper Crafts. Today I'm making a Valentine's Day project. So you can see this is a heart-shaped box. This particular box is 5 3/4 by 5 1/4 and it is 2 inches deep. You can obviously change up the depth of the box and change the overall size of the box. Once you see the measurements that I use, you could scale it up or down to suit your particular needs. And indeed, the door, you could have these so that they're a gatefold and they actually meet in the middle, and I will cover that in the video. It's not a tricky box to put together, so without further ado, let's get started. We're going to start by making the base of the box, and this will be on a piece which is 5 by 5 3/4 of an inch. You might want to go straight in on your actual cardstock or make a template to draw around. I'm going to have my piece in my scoreboard for the markings. You can obviously just use your ruler for the measurements if you would prefer. We're going to work on the first 5 3/4 inch side and make a pencil mark at 7/8 of an inch, 2 inches, 3 3/4 of an inch, and 4 7/8 of an inch. Then take your ruler. I'm going to line my ruler up with the 2 7/8 of an inch track and draw down 1 inch. So that will be all of these measurements along the top. Rotate the piece 90 degrees anti-clockwise. So our mark side will be on the left, and we're now working on a 5-inch side. Make a pencil mark at 7/8 of an inch and 2 3/8 of an inch. Rotate 90 degrees anti-clockwise and mark halfway across at 2 7/8 of an inch. Rotate 90 degrees anti-clockwise and make a pencil mark at 2 5/8 of an inch and 4 1/8 of an inch. So your markings will be as so on all 4 sides. So we're now going to join up the various pencil lines. So for instance, this 2-inch pencil mark here is going to come diagonally to the bottom of the 1-inch line at 2 7/8. I'm going to just turn the paper. The 3 3/4 inch mark is going to come in that direction. And we're going to join up the points all the way around. So we'll join the 4 7/8 up with the 7/8. Then the 2 3/8 inch mark is going to come all the way across like so. You can see how our heart is forming. So that is our heart shape. So you will then cut that out, and that will give you your base, which will look like this. So we'll now make the sides, and I will give you the measurements that my side pieces are based on. If yours are different, then you will need to adjust your score lines and your cardstock accordingly. If as we come to add the sides on, and you find that maybe your score line on the side pieces is maybe a 1/16 of an inch out, add your piece on, and we can always trim away the base to meet the side of the box. So if it's a smidge, a 1/16 of an inch, we can adjust the outer edge of the base once the sides have been put into place. Based on the measurements that I've given you to create the base, these 2 lengths here will be 1 1/4 inches. These 2 lengths across the top will be 1 1/8 of an inch. These 2 lengths here will be 1 1/4. These 2 side pieces will be 1 1/2, and these 2 longer pieces here will be 3 7/8 of an inch. So we'll now get our side pieces ready. So for the side pieces, you'll have 2 pieces, and these are going to be 9 1/2 inches long, and they are going to be the height of the box, which in my instance is 2 inches, plus 1/2 inch for a glue tab. So if you want to adjust the height of your box or the depth of your box, You can obviously make these pieces longer or shorter. Your score lines will be in the same place along the long side, and you will have a 1/2 inch tab on the short side. So my 9 inch by 2.5 inch piece is scored at 1/2 inch on the short side. Now I'm going to assume that you're using single-sided cardstock, and I'm going to give you a score lines for the left-hand side of the side panel and also for the right-hand side of the side panel, because the tabs are going to be at this point here and at this point here to join the two together. So we'll start with the left-hand side of the box. So along the long side, our score line will be 1/2 inch, 1 3/4 of an inch, 2 7/8 of an inch, 4 1/8 of an inch, and 5 5/8 of an inch. So this is for the left-hand side of the base. So for the right-hand side, again, your piece is 9.5 inches by 2.5 inches, scored at 1/2 inch on the short side. And on the long side, score at 1/2 inch, 4 3/8, 5 7/8, 7 1/8, and 8 1/4. We're now going to fold and burnish along all of the score lines on both pieces, and then on each piece we're going to create our glue tabs. So I'll start with the piece with the 1/2 inch tab over on the left hand side and my long piece over on the right hand side. I'm going to cut up each of the score lines within the 1/2 inch tab at the bottom up to the horizontal. Rotate, my 1/2 inch tab is on the right. I'm going to remove this bottom right hand corner like so, and then take a wedge from the ends of each of the glue tabs. So that's the left hand side prepared, and then we'll do exactly the same with the right hand side. Bring in my base piece. I'm just going to manipulate the piece around into roughly the shape that it's going to be, and just check that my tabs are not going to be interfering with one another, and I can see that they do fit in quite nicely. I'm going to add one strip in its entirety in and then add the other strip on. Because I'm using construction glue and it's a relatively short strip, I'm going to add on my glue to all of the strips at the same time, but you can obviously work one at a time. And all we're going to do is work your way around, manipulating the sides into place. That all fits on there quite nicely. And as I say, if you have a little bit of overhang, have the side inside the base, because you can then trim away if you need to. So I'm quite happy with that one. I'm just going to burnish that down. And now work on the second side, which is going to slot in like so. And then once I'm happy, I can burnish that down. That has sat on there quite nicely. And you can see here, I've got a little bit of an overhang on the box between the base of the box and the edge here on these top sections. So all I would do is, once that is completely dry, I will just go around with my scissors or my craft knife and just cut this excess away. I am going to have a piece of pattern paper in the bottom, so I will replicate this on my pattern paper, and I'm going to cut away a 1/16 because I only want a very narrow border between the pattern paper and the edge of the box. So I will cut this out this size and then trim away a 1/16 of an inch around the edge for the piece which is going to sit in here. For the lid, because this element doesn't have a lip for the lid to sit on, I've made the lid slightly larger so it sits on top and just over the edge of the outside. I'm going to cut the lid in 2 parts because I want this door to come over the top of the left-hand door. You could, if you wanted, have one heart and then just cut it straight down the middle to give it a gatefold effect. So have a look at how my lid is going to come together and then decide whether you like the same look. For the left-hand door, or you can use these to create the left and the right hand door if you want the gatefold where the pieces meet in the middle. You'll need a piece which is 3 3/8 times 5 1/4, and on the 3 3/8 of an inch side, score at 1/2 inch. Now I'm going to be working on the front of the cardstock. We're going to put our pencil lines in, but make sure that you don't put them in so heavy you can't rub them out. So much as we did for the base, we're going to make the markings for our cut lines. Along the top edge on the 3 3/8 of an inch side with the score line on the left hand side, make a pencil mark at 1 3/8 and 2 5/8. Rotate 90 degrees anti-clockwise and make a pencil mark at 7/8 of an inch. Rotate the piece 180 degrees so your 1/2 inch tab will be at the top, and score down to the 1/2 inch score line at 2 3/4 and 4 1/4. Fold your score line over and burnish. Place the piece back in the scoreboard with the tab folded under and make a pencil mark at 2 5/8 and 4 3/8. So that will give you your 2 pencil marks on the top, 1 on the right, 2 on the left hand side, and then 2 score lines. So that's our left hand door, or you can use this as a template, flip it over to give you your right hand door if you want your doors to meet in the middle. So I'm going to cut this one into shape to start with. Now you might want to cut with your scissors, with your trimmer, whichever is your choice, that's entirely up to you. I'm going to start working within the 1/2 inch tab section and cut up each of the score lines to the horizontal score line. So this is creating the glue tab for the hinge. And I'm going to just take a slight wedge from there. Rotate, and I'm going to cut up the long score line up to the start of the glue tab to remove this bottom right hand section. Move the hinge out of the way, and I'm going to cut just past the remaining pencil mark. I don't need to cut the whole section, so just past the pencil mark here. So this is my piece. I'm going to cut between the top pencil mark here and the pencil mark just to the side of the hinge. Again, you might want to put this in your trimmer, it's up to you. Like so. Rotate. I'm going to cut away between this section and this section, so it's much the same as we've cut the base. We're following the same process. So we look like this, and then I am going to use my trimmer, or you want a pair of long handled scissors, and I'm going to join up the bottom corner of the cardstock up to the pencil line just under the hinge, like so. Now, if I was having pattern paper, what I would do is draw around this on the pattern paper, use this as a template, and then trim off each of the sides on the pattern paper with my desired border. This is the left hand door, and that's going to sit on the top like so. Now obviously before you stick it in, if you want to change up any of the angles of the pieces, then you can sit the base on top, line up the left hand side of the box with the score line, and just sit on and just make sure that you're happy with the gap on all of the edges and the look of the top of the box. So I'm going to stick this one into place so that this can be drying whilst I work on the right hand door. Line up the score line with the top edge of the box. and then just fold that over. I'm going to burnish that down on the inside and then fold that down over the top, and you can see that sits nicely on the top. You now work on the right hand side. For the right hand side, assuming you're going to cut yours the same as mine, your starting cardstock will be 3 7/8 times 5 1/4. Along the 3 7/8 of an inch side, score at 1/2 inch, and then rotate the piece 180 degrees so that 1/2 inch section is over to the right. Make a pencil mark along the top at 1 1/4 inches and 2 5/8 of an inch. Rotate the piece 180 degrees and make a pencil mark at 3 3/8 of an inch. Rotate the piece anti-clockwise 90 degrees, so our 1/2 inch tab is at the bottom, and make a pencil mark at 3/8 of an inch and 5 inches. Rotate the piece 180, so our 1/2 inch tab is at the top. We're going to score down to the score line at 1 inch and 2 1/2 inches. Fold and burnish along that score line. Place the piece back in the scoreboard, so my folded under tab is here, and make a pencil mark at 7/8 of an inch and 2 5/8 of an inch. Rotate it back so that your 1/2 inch tab is at the bottom, and line your ruler up with the 1/2 inch mark down the left hand side. Make sure your ruler is running parallel. Make a pencil mark at the 1/2 inch mark across at 4 3/8 of an inch. So this is your piece, and there's the pencil mark we've just made. So we're now going to cut this. So I'm going to start by cutting up the 2 score lines within the 1/2 inch tab, as we did previously. I'm going to remove the section below what will be the hinge, like so. Move the hinge out of the way, and I'm going to cut away just past the pencil mark on the other score line, like so. Take a wedge from the hinge. I'm going to cut between this pencil mark to the right of the hinge up to the top. So we're starting to create our top heart shape, and I'm going to use my trimmer to cut from this pencil mark here across to the pencil mark here. So this is how my piece looks. Rotate the piece, and I'm going to cut between the pencil line here and the end point of the heart. Now I might need to adjust this once the lid is in place, but that's our starting point. I'm then going to cut from the remaining pencil mark on this end down to the 4 3/8 of an inch mark, like so. And then I'm going to cut from the 5 inch pencil mark down. Now you might want to change this up once I show you how this door fits in. So this is my heart. So you can see this 1/2 inch section from this point and this point is what is going to overlap on the left hand side door. So that's going to sit on there. Now you might find that one door overlaps the other. So for instance, if I sit the left hand on top of the right hand door, you can see that my points aren't quite meeting up. So I would just take my pencil, draw a line so that these two will then sit on top of one another. And you might not like this piece that I've cut this shape so that it sits on top here. You might want to cut away straight to the edge, and in fact that's what I'm going to do. So you have the option. So I'm just going to take my scissors and just extend that cut line. So I've cut that piece which runs up here away. So I'm just going to reshape the base element slightly. Now I'm going to glue this one in place. So this is going to sit in the side, be adhered in place as the left hand door. Make sure you get your score line sitting above, and then that's going to come across like so, and then that door is going to sit on top of that one. In terms of the pattern paper, for the right hand door I would do exactly the same. I'd recreate this and then trim away an 1/8 or a 1/16 all the way round, depending on what you want your border to be. Alternatively, you can just add your embellishments straight onto the top of this piece. It doesn't need pattern paper at all. So I'm going to continue with adding on my pattern paper and my elements, and then I'll come back and show you the finished box. Here is the finished decorated box. You can see I've added pattern paper onto the doors, and I used these doors as a template and then took off an 1/8 of an inch on all of the sides, and I've just added an additional heart element there to get the doors open. I've added the pattern paper to the inside, and I actually used the base template that I'd used and then cut off a border from that and then used that as a template from this piece. I also added pattern paper around the sides, and I'll give you the measurements for those. So they are all 1 3/4 of an inch deep. There were 2 pieces which were 3 5/8 of an inch long, 2 pieces which were 1 1/4, 2 pieces which were 7/8 of an inch, and 4 pieces which were 1 inch. And I've added those onto all of the sections around the sides. Overall, I'm really pleased with how the box has come out. Hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel. And until next time, thanks for watching.